Hello, students. Ms. Cohn here. Since you are writing a literary analysis paper again, this time over ink cold blood rather than A Raisin in the Sun and Fences, I thought it might be a good time to actually reflect on the paper you wrote for A Raisin in the Sun and Fences and talk about some poor student writing trends I saw in some of your essays. Now, granted, I didn't see all of these mistakes in all of your essays, but generally speaking, these are the most frequent kinds of poor writing trends I saw in those papers. So I thought it might be a good time to for you to reflect upon some of these things and make the adjustment in your head before writing this next paper, especially because it's in a time fashion. It might be nice to have these in your head and think of what not to do in this next essay. So here are some of the things I saw you doing that you shouldn't have done. For instance, a lot of you in your essays forgot to introduce the titles of the work and the authors of what you were writing about. So definitely in the paper, you got to make sure in the first paragraph include In Cold Blood and Truman Capote. All right. And you got to do it the first time you mention the text. All right. Some of you didn't have much of a lead in to bring the reader into the idea of your paper. You just sort of smacked me with the thesis right up front. You got to have a lead in, okay, to bring the reader into the idea of the paper. The thesis should be the last sentence of the first paragraph, and you got to have more than one sentence in your paper. You got to have a strong thesis that addresses one of the four writing prompts. Some of you didn't have a strong thesis in that last paper, okay? Some of you didn't have much of a final so what in the conclusion. It's important to give that final so what. Leave the reader with something to think about at the end of your paper. For a lot of you, in that Raisin in the Sun and Fences paper, you lacked analysis. Okay, you need to include analysis. A lot of you didn't transition well into your body paragraphs or were missing topic sentences in that Fences and the Raisin in the Sun paper. You had awkward transitions into the evidence, or you lacked scene summary to bring the reader gently into the evidence, the place in the text where the evidence is. A lot of you with that Fences and a Raisin in the Sun paper didn't use present tense verbs when referring to action in literature. A lot of you didn't underline or italicize the title of the plays. It's important to underline or italicize In Cold Blood every time you use the words In Cold Blood in the paper. A lot of you didn't punctuate quotes correctly. You use a comma to introduce the quote from the text. You also, and that's not just what people say in dialogue, but it's also quoted evidence from the text. That's narration. Comma to introduce the quote, period goes inside quotation mark unless you use citations. In that case, the period goes after the citation. So, comma, quote, evidence, end quote, citation, period. Okay? So don't forget your citations. A lot of you in the Raisin in the Sun and Fence papers you use first and second person. Literary analysis is a third person kind of deal. Okay? Also, a lot of you in the Raisin in the Sun and Fences paper made silly grammar punctuation errors like fragments, run-ons, comma splices, comma errors, capitalization errors, apostrophe errors, and so on. Take a look. See what kind of comments I made on that paper and adjust your thinking. So you should avoid those things, those poor writing trends in literary analysis writing. So what I'm going to ask you to do here in a minute, okay, with the literary analysis reflection assignment is to go back into your literary analysis papers that you wrote for Raisin in the Sun and Fences and assess your strengths and weaknesses in terms of literary analysis writing and complete the literary analysis reflection assignment. And then so carry that thinking and transfer that thinking then and apply that thinking then to this next time writing, okay? Because the same kind of principles are going to apply, except for the fact that you're only writing in response to one text instead of two and not including a works cited page on this one since it's a timed writing, Okay, you're being graded for the same things as you were for the fences and a raisin in the sun paper. Okay, so make sure again you do this reflection and think about your strengths and your weaknesses, and try to improve your weaknesses on this next paper. All right, so I'm going to jump over to the literary analysis reflection assignment here, and it's an easy 10 points. All I'm asking you to do, again, is to go think about the trends I just talked about, okay? I'm asking you to go back into your literary analysis paper you wrote for Fences and a Raisin in the Sun, okay? And then look at the paper you wrote and think about the trends I discussed and answer these questions. 1. After reading and reflecting on the literary analysis paper you wrote in response to Fences and a Raisin in the Sun, please list 3 writing strengths you exhibited in writing literary analysis. Maybe you think you had a strong thesis, or maybe you think you had a good final so what, or maybe you thought you transitioned well, or maybe you thought you had strong evidence that matched or did well to illustrate the claim you were making, the thesis, okay? So list your strengths. You're going to capitalize on these strengths for the next paper. And then in question 2, I ask you again to go back into that paper you wrote in response to Fences and a Raisin in the Sun and list 3 areas you would like to improve upon in terms of the literary analysis writing. Maybe you'd like to develop the analysis more. Maybe you would like to improve your transitions, or maybe you want to do a better job with scene summary and bringing the reader into the place in the text where the evidence is, or maybe you want to do better to leave the reader with something to think about and do better with that final so what. Whatever it is, okay? List 3 things you need to improve on in terms of literary analysis writing here. I want you to think about strengths and weaknesses going into this next paper. Capitalize on your strengths, adjust for your weaknesses, and try to improve. All right, thank you. Let me know if you have any questions.